For centuries, alchemy has stood at the intersection of wonder and misunderstanding. It has been ridiculed as superstition, romanticized as spiritual metaphor, and rarely examined for what it actually was, a bold, often beautiful attempt to grasp the deepest workings of nature. Before science became a profession and spirituality a consumer product, alchemy offered a way of thinking that was both experimental and philosophical, mystical and material. Today, however, the discourse around alchemy is shaped by two dominant misconceptions. On one side, academic circles often dismiss alchemy as a bundle of outdated superstitions, a primitive attempt to understand the natural world, filled with magical thinking and pseudoscientific nonsense. On the other side, New Age movements embrace alchemy as a purely symbolic language of spiritual growth, cherry-picking ideas to fit modern narratives while ignoring historical and textual complexity. Dr. Justin Sledge, a historian of Western esotericism, points out that both of these extreme approaches are flawed. The academic view erases the actual contributions alchemy made to scientific progress, while the spiritual reinterpretation distorts its context by stripping away its physical and experimental dimensions. To truly understand alchemy, we must recognize its historical specificity and complexity, and resist the urge to reduce it to either superstition or metaphor. Let's now turn to 5 major misconceptions about alchemy and explore what they miss and what they reveal. Misconception 1. Alchemy was just pseudoscience. From a modern scientific perspective, many of alchemy's claims appear laughably incorrect. Turning lead into gold, seeking an elixir of life, searching for a universal solvent. But labelling alchemy simply as pseudoscience flattens a rich and nuanced tradition. Alchemy was a system of thought and practice deeply rooted in the worldview of its time. Alchemists did not have access to atomic theory or the periodic table, but they were not ignorant or irrational. They believed that nature was intelligible and that substances could be transformed in meaningful ways. More importantly, they operated within a philosophical framework that linked the physical world to the spiritual, ethical, and cosmic realms. Figures like Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle weren't exceptions. They were part of a broad community of thinkers who saw no contradiction between alchemical experimentation and serious intellectual inquiry. Newton, for example, wrote more on alchemy than on optics or gravity. Alchemy was not outside science. It was science in its formative stages. Alchemists documented their procedures meticulously. They practiced distillation, sublimation, and calcination. They produced acids, perfumes, dyes, and medicines. Many of their techniques are still used today. Hennig Brand, a 17th century German alchemist, discovered phosphorus while distilling urine in his quest to find the philosopher's stone. Even though his goal was misguided, the process led to a landmark discovery. Moreover, alchemists didn't just follow blind recipes, they engaged in theoretical speculation. They used complex symbolic systems, encoded in allegories, mythological language, and religious imagery, to describe their processes. These were not empty metaphors, they were embedded in the broader worldview of the time, in which matter and spirit were not yet separated. To dismiss all this as pseudoscience is not just inaccurate, it is historically unjust. Alchemy deserves to be understood on its own terms, as an early and genuine attempt to explore nature's mysteries through both material and metaphysical lenses. Misconception 2. Alchemy was only about inner transformation. The idea that alchemy is really just about spiritual transformation has become increasingly popular, especially due to thinkers like Mary Ann Atwood in the 19th century and Carl Gustav Jung in the 20th. Jung saw alchemical texts as symbols of the psyche, a mirror of psychological individuation and inner integration. This symbolic reading made alchemy more accessible to modern audiences and connected it to the emerging field of depth psychology. While Jung's insights are valuable, they tell only part of the story. The vast majority of historical alchemists were deeply engaged with physical materials. They were not just writing allegories, they were experimenting in laboratories. They measured temperatures, observed colour changes, and refined minerals. They built intricate furnaces and glassware. Their texts often describe how to process mercury, purify sulfur, or dissolve gold. These are not metaphors for ego and shadow, they are chemical operations. Of course, many alchemists did believe that spiritual purity was necessary for success. They saw a connection between moral character and experimental outcomes. The ideal alchemist was not just a technician, but a philosopher, someone in harmony with the divine order. But this emphasis on inner virtue did not negate the importance of the outer, material process. It complemented it. This dual commitment to inner and outer transformation is what made alchemy unique. It was neither purely spiritual nor purely physical. It was both. Reducing alchemy to inner symbolism alone flattens its complexity and erases its lived historical reality. Misconception 3. Alchemy was just about turning lead into gold. One of the most enduring stereotypes about alchemy is the image of the greedy, gold-obsessed alchemist. While transmuting base metals into gold, called chrysopoeia, was indeed a prominent goal for many, it was never the whole story. The true aspiration of most alchemists was the discovery of the philosopher's stone, a substance believed not only to transmute metals, but also to heal disease and extend life. It was understood as a principle of perfection and balance, capable of restoring harmony to the natural world and to the human body. Simultaneously, alchemy made important contributions to medicine. Figures like Paracelsus in the 16th century radically shifted the focus of alchemy from wealth to healing. He declared that the true aim of alchemy was to prepare effective medicines. Using minerals, salts, and metals in new ways, he laid the groundwork for modern pharmacology. Alchemy was also deeply philosophical. Its methods were framed within broader metaphysical systems. The processes of calcination, dissolution, coagulation, and fermentation mirrored the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The transformations in the lab were seen as reflections of cosmic processes. In short, alchemy was never just about wealth. It was a total worldview, ethical, cosmological, medical, and spiritual. To define it solely by the pursuit of gold is to misunderstand its richness and ambition. Misconception 4. Alchemy died with modern chemistry. A common myth is that alchemy simply disappeared once chemistry came along. Historians often point to Robert Boyle's The Skeptical Chymist, 1661, as the text that killed alchemy and gave birth to modern science. But this narrative is too clean. In reality, the transition was gradual and overlapping. The terms alchemy and chemistry were used interchangeably well into the 18th century. Boyle, Newton, and other early chemists did not reject alchemy outright. They reformed and refined it. The boundaries between science, magic, and religion were porous. Furthermore, alchemical ideas persisted in transformed ways. The 19th century saw the rise of esoteric movements like Theosophy and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which reinterpreted alchemy for spiritual development. In the 20th century, Jung reimagined it as a symbolic language of the unconscious. Even today, spagyric medicine, holistic therapies, and alchemical art keep the tradition alive in new forms. In a fascinating twist, modern physics has achieved what alchemists dreamed of: transmutation. Scientists have used nuclear reactions to transform elements. Turning lead into gold is technically possible, although economically pointless. Still, the symbolic power of that achievement is hard to ignore. So no, alchemy didn't die. It evolved, both into modern science and into symbolic traditions. To see it as obsolete is to misunderstand its influence. Misconception 5. We have nothing to learn from alchemy. Perhaps the most dangerous misconception is that alchemy, being wrong, has nothing to teach us. But alchemy's real value lies not in the correctness of its theories, but in its approach to knowledge. First, alchemy teaches epistemic humility. Alchemists often admitted failure. They wrote about setbacks, elusive results, and the difficulty of mastering nature. They understood that knowledge is hard-won, incomplete, and always evolving. This humility is something modern science sometimes forgets. Second, alchemy integrated ethics with experimentation. Many alchemists believed that the researcher's moral state influenced the outcome of the work. Today we separate ethics from empirical science, and often with disastrous results, from chemical weapons to environmental degradation. The alchemists remind us that science without wisdom can be dangerous. Third, alchemy embodied a holistic worldview. It did not compartmentalize human knowledge. Instead, it united cosmology, theology, medicine, and natural philosophy. This integrative spirit is sorely needed in our fragmented intellectual landscape. Alchemy shows that it is possible to seek knowledge that is not just useful, but meaningful. Finally, alchemy continues to inspire art, literature, and imagination. From Goethe's Faust to Jungian psychology, from Renaissance emblems to modern graphic novels, alchemical imagery has proven remarkably resilient. It taps into universal archetypes of death and rebirth, suffering and redemption, chaos and order. Its symbols still resonate. In this way, alchemy remains a cultural and intellectual inheritance. We do not need to practice it to learn from it. To understand alchemy properly, we must avoid both the arrogance of modern scientism and the idealization of mystical romanticism. Alchemy was never just a failed attempt at chemistry, nor was it merely a symbolic path to inner peace. It was an attempt to understand and transform the world through a framework that did not yet separate the material from the spiritual, the empirical from the ethical. Today, science has achieved extraordinary things by drawing clear lines, by defining what counts as knowledge, by measuring what can be tested. But in doing so, it sometimes loses sight of the questions alchemy never abandoned. What is the purpose of transformation? Can knowledge be separated from wisdom? Is understanding the world also a way of understanding ourselves? Dr. Justin Sledge reminds us that dismissing alchemy as foolish or idolizing it as mystical are both forms of forgetting. Real understanding lies in honoring its complexity. Alchemy wasn't purely rational or purely spiritual, it was the space between. And in an age that increasingly separates mind from matter, fact from meaning, perhaps it is this in-between space that we need to rediscover most. Alchemy is not simply about gold, it's about transformation, not just of metal, but of worldview, and that's something we will always need. Thank you for watching.